He had everything: private islands, a mansion in Manhattan, connections to presidents, princes, and billionaires. But Jeffrey Epstein's wealth wasn't built on genius or innovation. It was built on something far darker. And for decades, the system that should have stopped him protected him instead. This is the story of how power corrupts justice, and why one man's crimes reveal the cracks in a broken system. By the end of this video, you'll understand how someone accused of horrific crimes walked free for years, how the rich and powerful play by different rules, and why this case changed everything. But first, we need to go back to where it all began. In the 1980s, Jeffrey Epstein was a nobody, a college dropout, a high school math teacher in New York. But he was ambitious, charismatic, and ruthless. He wanted wealth. He wanted influence. And he knew exactly how to get it. Epstein didn't climb the ladder. He bypassed it entirely. He convinced powerful people he was one of them, a financial genius managing money for billionaires. But here's the thing. No one really knew what he did. His business model was a mystery. Former colleagues said he didn't seem to work like other financiers. There were no major deals, no public investments, no clear source of his enormous wealth. What Epstein understood better than anyone was this: power isn't just about money. It's about access. It's about knowing secrets. It's about making yourself indispensable to people who matter. He collected relationships like trophies: presidents, scientists, British royalty, CEOs. And with each connection, his shield grew stronger, because powerful people protect their own. And Epstein made sure he was one of them. But behind the private jets and the glamorous parties, something sinister was happening. Something that would eventually bring his entire world crashing down. By the early 2000s, whispers started to emerge. Young girls, underage victims, allegations of abuse. This should have been the end of Jeffrey Epstein's story. It should have been justice. But what happened next reveals everything wrong with how power corrupts the legal system. The evidence was damning. Police identified dozens of victims. Witnesses came forward. The FBI got involved. Federal prosecutors prepared an indictment that could have sent Epstein to prison for life. And then, it all disappeared. In 2008, Epstein's high-powered legal team, led by some of the most expensive lawyers in America, negotiated a deal. Not just any deal. One of the most controversial plea agreements in legal history. Epstein pleaded guilty to just 2 state charges. He received 13 months in a county jail, where he was allowed to leave for work, released 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Think about that. A man accused of abusing dozens of underage girls spent most of his prison time outside of prison. But here's what makes it worse. The deal was made in secret. The victims weren't told. They weren't consulted. They woke up one day to discover that the man who hurt them had gotten away with it. And no one had even asked them how they felt. The prosecutor who approved this deal, Alexander Acosta, he later became Secretary of Labor under President Trump. When asked years later why he gave Epstein such a lenient sentence, Acosta said he'd been told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. What does that mean? We still don't fully know, but it suggests something terrifying. That Epstein had protection from somewhere high up, that the rules didn't apply to him. The victims were devastated. The law had failed them, and Epstein walked free, richer and more connected than ever. For over a decade, Epstein lived his life as if nothing had happened. He threw parties. He flew on his private jet. He appeared in public with powerful people who either didn't know about his past or didn't care. But the victims never forgot, and neither did a handful of journalists and investigators who refused to let this story die. In 2018, the Miami Herald published a groundbreaking investigation called Perversion of Justice. Reporter Julie Brown tracked down dozens of victims, exposed the corrupt plea deal, and forced the world to confront what had been hidden for so long. The public was outraged. How did this happen? How did someone with so much evidence against him walk free? The pressure became unbearable. In July 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested again. This time, federal prosecutors in New York brought new charges: trafficking, abuse of minors, decades of crimes. Finally, it seemed, justice would be served. Epstein was denied bail. He was locked in one of the most secure detention facilities in America. The trial was coming. Victims prepared to testify. The world waited for answers. And then, on August 10, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell. The official ruling, suicide. But his death raised more questions than it answered. How does one of the most high-profile prisoners in America on suicide watch die in a federal facility? Cameras malfunctioned. Guards fell asleep. The circumstances were so suspicious that even people who normally don't believe in conspiracies started asking questions. Epstein's death meant he would never face trial. The victims would never see him convicted. The full truth about who knew what, who helped him, who protected him, might never come out. But the story didn't end there. His associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, was arrested in 2020. She was convicted in 2021 of sex trafficking and is now serving 20 years in prison. It was a victory, but a hollow one for many victims who wanted more. The Epstein case exposed something deeply broken in our justice system. It showed how wealth can buy freedom, how connections can shield you from consequences, how the powerful protect each other, even when crimes are horrific and victims are children. Documents and flight logs revealed that Epstein had relationships with some of the most powerful people in the world. Some were likely innocent connections. Others we may never know. But what we do know is that for years, people looked the other way. They enjoyed his parties, flew on his plane, accepted his donations, and asked no questions. The Jeffrey Epstein case isn't just about one man's crimes. It's about a system that allows the rich and powerful to live by different rules. It's about how justice can be bought, how victims can be silenced, and how the truth can be buried under enough money and influence. But it's also about resilience, about the victims who refuse to stay silent, about the journalists who kept digging when everyone else moved on, about a public that demanded accountability. The system failed these victims once, and in many ways, it failed them again. But their courage sparked a conversation we're still having today about power, privilege, and justice. Because here's the truth. Jeffrey Epstein didn't operate in a vacuum. He had help. He had protection. He had a system that enabled him for decades. And until we confront that system, until we demand that the powerful face the same justice as everyone else, this story isn't over. The question isn't just, how did Epstein get away with it for so long? The question is, who let him? And are they still in positions of power today? If this story made you think, if it made you angry, if it made you want change, share it. Talk about it. Demand better from our systems of justice. Because the victims of Jeffrey Epstein deserve more than silence. They deserve a world where power doesn't protect predators. Thanks for watching.